I personally think the principles are the better way to do the regulations, because if you get overly prescriptive, tech changes too fast, you can't keep up with it.
Hello and welcome to the conversation. I'm Eleanor Sackerdnight, and today I'm speaking to Matthew Martin. Welcome to the conversation, Matthew.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. Excited to be here.
So Matthew's a strategic advisor and a board member for various startups and venture studios, where he leverages his expertise in cybersecurity, risk, AI, and technology to enable innovation and growth. So let's start with what industries the startups that you work with operate in.
Yeah, absolutely. Most startups I work with are in the cybersecurity space. So trying to help develop better tools for us to use to defend ourselves every day. I also work a lot with AI, specifically around governance and making sure we have safe and responsible AI. And then finally working with companies that are sort of like offshore staff augmentation models out of specifically a company I'm working with out of Jordan, to help them compete with the likes of India, Colombia, Mexico, et cetera, and getting into US and European markets.
Thank you. Where do you see the most potential for growth in the startup world?
Well, I think there's a lot of developing markets around the world that could really use the technology, and so I think what we've seen in the past is a lot of hyper focus on US and European markets, obviously, because that's where most of the spending has been. But I think there's some developing markets around the world, specifically in Africa and Southeast Asia, where they could really use it, really need it. It's about getting the exposure to those specific tools, specifically the cyber tools. And then, everybody knows AI is a topic that that's on everybody's mind. And I think the AI specific startups around security and governance of AI, the market is boundless at the moment of what that could look like.
So speaking of AI and the big regulation debate, it's a year on from ChatGPT that's just celebrated its first anniversary, and that was groundbreaking. How prepared are we for what's to come, and who's doing the most or the best in terms of AI regulation? And if you can, speak to the countries or regions that are most prepared in terms of AI.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when you speak about regulations, there's really two approaches that we're seeing a lot of, right? There's the UK and the US, which are more focused on like principles of AI, like generally do this, don't do this. And then you see things like the EU and others are very prescriptive, right? Like you do this, you do this, you do this. When you're developing an AI system, you do this, and when you secure, you do this. And what's interesting to me is to sort of see how those things play out. I personally think the principles are the better way to do the regulations, because if you get overly prescriptive, tech changes too fast, you can't keep up with it. And for example, like we've seen how much the world has changed in the last year, right? As you said, with OpenAI and ChatGPT. Well, the EU AI Act wouldn't even come into play until 2026, right? So most of the things don't become required. So like we can just imagine by 2026, is this thing even going to be fit for purpose at that point, right?
Is that how fast it's developing?
Yes, like things are changing so quickly that within 2 years, if you're overly prescriptive on the regulation, you're going to have to change it, right? And so I think the right way to go about it is to define the right principles to help guide the industry in the right way to do things responsibly. So I think in the end, the sort of US and UK approach of principles based will be the winner and the right way to do it. But we'll see how that plays out. I think as far as are we prepared for it? I don't think so. I think but I also think we're a little bit further away from it sort of changing our world as much as the media has led us to believe, right? I think there's some really cool things that these generative AI tools allow us to do. Like we can use them to do some really cool things with chatbots and private industry to sort of become more efficient and alleviate some of the work that, like specifically in cybersecurity, so that we face a big problem with skills shortage globally for cybersecurity people. And the more we can use Gen AI to create bots that allow us to repurpose other people to do different roles, that's a way for us to tackle that skills gap, right? And be able to grow our teams and do more security with the same sort of staffing levels. So I think you're going to see some of that. You're going to see people using it day to day to help them with thank you letters and invites and marketing materials. But the truly like game changing process improvements and like changing the way we live, I think we're still a little bit away from that, and mainly because of hallucinations. And for those that don't know what hallucinations are in Gen AI, it's basically like when you get an answer that's like not correct or unexpected, right? So if you say, you ask it what color is the sky and it says pink, right? That would be a hallucination, right? But it's not always a bad thing. There's multiple types of hallucinations you can have. You can have bad ones. You can have ones that are sort of insignificant, doesn't matter. But you can also have good ones. And so sometimes you can ask it specific questions and it'll give you back a completely new way to think about a problem, and it can help you with process improvement, for example. So a long story to say, I think there's a long way for us to go before we're using it to like rebalance portfolios, because we can't trust it to be accurate. And until we can develop that, and it's one of the reasons why I work so much with the AI governance and responsible safety startups, is to build in some way to detect hallucinations and be more proactive in that monitoring. Because once we can do that, then it sort of enables us to really use Gen AI to its full potential. So I think we're all on that road. I don't think we're prepared yet, but I do think there's a lot of investment in those types of tools, those types of startups that are coming, and a lot in Europe and the US. And we'll see over the next year or two. I think we'll have one. We'll get somebody who's successful in that, and then it will really just go crazy.
Explode.
Yeah.
So we've seen also some countries and some regions be slightly more open, perhaps because they didn't have the regulation that Europe typically requires. I remember somebody telling me ages ago, in the US, they innovate, in Europe, they regulate. What about the rest of the world? Because obviously I've seen some countries in the UAE, in the Middle East, so the UAE, for example, had a minister of artificial intelligence already back in 2018 when I was there. So they were also, inviting companies to come and test their tech in their country. So which regions or pockets of countries do you think are exploring the most, innovating the most, and what do you think is required for innovation to flourish?
Yeah, so I was just recently in South Korea for a conference. It wasn't actually about AI, but I ended up having a few conversations with people, and one of the people I met there is the head of cybercrime for Dubai, and like to really understand like what they're doing as a country around AI and how they're using it for various things. I got a chance to read their AI strategy for the country, and it's really remarkable how much money and resources they're putting into that, and the ways they're thinking about using it to be more secure and safe, not only in cyber but physically. Right, it's really inspiring. And then also in Korea itself, the way they're using it was pretty cool. Some of the stuff I can't talk about, but just seeing the way they're using it, I do think there's situations where a lot of developing countries aren't using it as much as I think they should. I think there's some easy, like low hanging fruit where they could adopt some basic AI tools to really make a huge impact on their citizens and their populations. So I'd like to hope they're going to do that relatively soon. It's one of the things I want to try to help with. But yeah, I think you're right. In the Middle East, there's a big push to utilize AI, and there's a lot of innovation coming out of that area. and so I'm really excited to see where it comes. I think in Europe, there's a lot of cool startups, but there is a lot of regulation, and seeing how that continues to grow. And there's a few in the US, which I think have a lot of promise, coming out of Silicon Valley and Austin area. And yeah, so there's a lot of it. It's going to be a matter of weeding through the real ones and the ones that are just along for the ride. So it's still really early to know exactly who's going to sort of win that race, but it's exciting.
Yeah, it's a whole new world. So internet penetration in the developing world, and how Western solutions are perhaps disrupting local businesses. Disrupting can be a very good thing. It can also be not so good. So you have experience in Southeast Asia, as you just mentioned, and the Middle East, in other countries as well that you told me earlier about. Can you tell us how the internet penetration is affecting high growth countries or developing countries, and what to look out for there?
Yeah, I think it's important. I think you mentioned it earlier. Like there's sort of a double-edged sword, right? You get good and you get bad, and um, I think if we start with the good side, right, it's exposure to new ideas. It's being connected to the world and really understanding what's going on around you, and the educational opportunities go way up, and you have a much more educated population, and there's all these great things I think most people know and think about. And I think the part that, for me, somebody like me, I always think about is, okay, what can go wrong? And so there's a few things that I think developing countries and local communities in there have to be careful about. And one is one that those of us in the West are very familiar with, and it's the dangers of social media and how young people can be easily influenced by what's posted online, whether it's Facebook or X or Instagram or TikTok, but also when you go diving into Reddit subthreads, and things can go off the rails pretty quickly. And for people who have people who are on the internet every day as their whole life, like somebody in the US or UK or Europe, we still fall victim to some things that we read online, right? So imagine if you're somebody who's spent their life disconnected, and now all of a sudden they have access to all this information. They don't have the basic tool sets to figure out, like, is this real, or is this just somebody making something up, or is this somebody intentionally lying to me to get them to do something? And so I think there has to be educational campaigns sort of the country level, right? So if you think about these countries in Africa who are expanding out into the rural areas to get people connected, it should also come with an awareness campaign of like, hey, here's what you should look out for. Here's how to be safe on the internet. Here's how to tell if something's manipulating you or if it's real. And because we have to get people to understand it's, we're not going to take somebody who's lived in the jungle their whole life and just give them a car and say, hey, go drive it. We're going to teach them how to drive it, right? They're going to have to go to some kind of training course to learn how to follow the rules of the road. And it's the same thing for the internet, right? We should have some sort of training course that says, here's how to safely do that. And it's because things you see, like, for example, is I don't know how well known it is, but Islamic extremist groups use the internet to recruit all the time in developing countries. It happens in the Middle East. It happens around the world. And we have to be careful that we are able to defend against that, right? And because the last thing you want is to all of a sudden open up the internet, but now you have an extremist problem, right? So we need to make sure that people are equipped with the tools to navigate the internet when they get it.
Interesting. I saw that in Niger, where I was earlier this year to interview President Mohamed Bazoum, who is still 4 months now later being held hostage. And certainly what the junta claimed was obviously insecurity was rising against the jihadists, although President Bazoum had a fairly robust and had a good record in his 2 years as president. And of course, now the jihadists have attacked 400% times more. and it's what the junta used as well in the streets. You would think that the population were anti-French, and that whilst there was an anti-French sentiment, they certainly weren't pro-Wagner or pro-Russia, yet somehow they were given flags and they were given billboards and all sorts of things. So there's this kind of false reporting of the true sentiment, but that's not so much, well, that can be swiftly moved around social media, but that's not necessarily the reality. Right. So certainly mainstream media reports were that there were thousands of pro-Russian Nigerians with an E, and of course it's not really the case, but right. But certainly recruiting is made possible given demographic issues they have, climate issues they have, and so they were also working on how to stop or lessen or harden the task for jihadists to recruit, even if they understand there are certain things that they can't really fight against. So, okay. So awareness campaigns is something you think is fundamental.
Yeah, there have to be some kind of training, like whether they get it in the school system or through some other method. But yeah, we have to do a better job of training the populations to handle what they now have access to.
So let's talk about your experience also in cybersecurity. You're a seasoned cybersecurity leader with a decade experience in the financial services industries as well. How can countries become more cyber resilient?
Yeah, so it's similar to how a private company would do it, right? It's understanding your threat landscape, right? You start with like what are we worried about, right? Understanding the geopolitical landscape and the cyber landscape is always an interesting beast to get a hold of, but and then starting to figure out what are our critical systems, right? And I think a lot of developing countries sometimes I don't want to say struggle with it, but it's a part that sometimes you skip over because you're like everything's critical. And the thing is, in a private company, they do the same. They have the same sort of process where you go through like everything's critical. We have to protect everything, and then you sort of figure out like, no, I don't have to protect everything. I have to. These are the things that matter the most. This is where we spend our money because you don't have unlimited budgets and you don't have unlimited amount of resources to do these things. And it's important to figure out where you sort of start, where you build up your infrastructure. You want to protect yourself from cyber attacks and you want to protect yourself from insider things. And so it's important to sort of identify those things that are the most important. And I think a lot of times, at least in my experience with developing countries, there's a real lack of cyber resources, right, locally in those countries. And I mean, it's not something that's just to them either, right? The US, the UK, all over Europe, we all have shortage of cyber resources. It's just even more extreme when you get into the developing countries. And a lot of these countries don't even have cybersecurity programs in their universities, right? And so the kids that are coming through school, they're either self-taught or they're having to learn about it some other way. And so I think along with, actually putting into place the cyber things to make yourself more resilient, it's also the programs to train your population so that you're, in 3-4 years, you're starting to see graduates come out that are trained to be cybersecurity professionals, right? And then you got to hold on to them, right? So there's got to be some incentive to like, if you're a kid growing up in Ghana and you're going through the school system and you go get a college education, and let's skip ahead a little bit and say we've developed this cybersecurity program and now you're coming out with a cybersecurity degree. Well, do you stay and work in Ghana or do you immigrate to Canada or somewhere to get a high paying job? So you have to be real that's a real risk, right? Is that you spend a lot of money to develop talent and then they go somewhere else and make all their money, right? And so there has to be programs around like how do we hold on to the talent, right, and keep them in country so that not only are they helping us with our cyber infrastructure, but it's also growing our economy, right? Because now their tax money is staying in the country. they're having kids, those are going to be educated, will have kids, they're going to go get, and so on and so forth, right? And it sort of builds. So it has to be this holistic approach, not just a technology problem. It's a people problem, where we have to train people and create this culture of education and cyber awareness, and then it sort of builds on itself.
Thank you. So, Two Candlesticks, would you like to tell me about that?
Yeah, Two Candlesticks is a cybersecurity consulting firm that we launched this year. After spending my career in Fortune 500 financial services firms, I wanted to have a way to give back a little bit. So we're focused on helping startups. We're helping get into US and European markets to help develop better cybersecurity tools. But we're also focused on working with small, medium-sized companies who maybe aren't able to afford the full executive CISO to come in and run their security program. So we want to have a way for them to have access to CISOs and get really good security advice and help them develop their programs. And then finally, we really want to focus on helping developing countries so that we're able to sort of bring up the level of security around the world to make everybody safer. There's a conversation we have a lot in security where we talk about like a cyber security poverty line, right? It's where there's this minimum amount of security to where you can consider yourself safe, and there's a lot of companies and countries that are below that line. And I really want to focus on those because I want to raise it so we can get people up to that level. And so that's the mission of Two Candlesticks, is to make the world a safer place and to find ways to do that around the world.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time, Matthew.
Thank you.